go with this one.
Well, Bill and I are friends now. I got to stick with him. FD Lauders quit stalking me, so I need a new. I'll stop it.
Say when. All right, everyone. We have, I guess, I wouldn't call it sad news, but it's slightly disappointing news. Schaefer Cox has been sentenced to, I should say resentenced, after appeal to 188 months in prison. That's just over 15 years, which of course is an improvement over his previous sentence, which was 26 years. So you could almost say his sentence has been cut in half. He overturned one of his major convictions on appeal. He had been convicted of a lot of gun charges, which were 5 to 10 year sentences, running concurrent. Also, he had originally been convicted by the jury in Alaska of solicitation of murder of federal officials and conspiracy to murder federal officials. On appeal to the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco, the Ninth Circuit overturned the solicitation of murder of federal officials charge on the grounds that there was no named federal officials that were actually named realistically, and so that was overturned by the Ninth Circuit. By the way, the same logic would almost apply to the conspiracy to murder federal officials, because really the facts of the case are so, you could say, amorphous, you could say spongy. It all involves different discussions in different settings, and there was one guy, Michael Anderson, who supposedly, at least conceptually, people talked about he had a database with a few names of state officials, not too many federal officials. And then, by the way, this has all been litigated in different arguments for this throughout this entire case. No one ever actually saw the database, as far as I know. Supposedly Mr. Anderson got rid of it or destroyed it, but the Fed said there was this database of names. How many names? 14 names?
15 to 20 names.
Yeah, 15 names, most of which were state officials. So he was charged with, solicitation of murder of federal officials, no names, hardly. Conspiracy to murder federal officials, again, no names, hardly. There was a talk of a database with some names of state officials. And again, this was all talk about, there was talk that all militia, I hope that all good Americans have a line in the sand, conceptually, that government must not cross. And I hope all good Americans, I know I do, have a line in the sand that says, if government crosses this line, I will become an angel of vengeance for the Constitution, etc. And this was the kind of talk they were doing. And they would occasionally throw out what would happen if martial law, in the defense of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and all motherhood and apple pie. And what will you do? Well, these guys, this Alaska peacemaker, so-called militia that Schaefer Cox was involved in up in the Fairbanks, Alaska area back in 2011 or so. They had lots of talk. Government entrapped them with so many informants from different agencies. We just learned today there were discussions involving one federal informant trying to set up another man in the militia, and the other man was also a federal informant, trying to get them to state a plan. What's your plan? What's your plan? This is a common thing that government wants. So if you're in the militia movement, guys, I'm going to give you some advice. A, never ever state names, never write names down of individuals that you don't like. That's A. Number B, never have a plan about what you might do if things go bad, because we all know that in the end, every government in world history ultimately comes for everything. And we all just need to understand when that happens, we need to run for the hills and do whatever we can to try to survive and restore the Bill of Rights. I have with me here some kangaroo officials. What do you guys have to say?
Well, I didn't realize that Bill Folt was originally trying to entrap Schaefer as a sovereign citizen. His job was to try to get warrants to go and arrest judges. That was the original push he was doing. And then for whatever reason, they changed it up and went with the aggression and violence, just doing anything they could to provoke him, to get him to do something that was worthy of them arresting him and being able to shut him up. So it's kind of interesting how the same government that shoots and kills and kidnaps and points guns at people is out trying to set up people to get them to do those same things so they can arrest them. It's pretty scary what's going on, and I hope people are paying attention. Our job at this point is just to bring bring attention to the kangaroo courts so that America can stop forgetting about the prisoners, believing they've had due process. There is no due process in these courts. People like Amber Geyer murdered Botham Jean in his own home, got 10 years. Schaefer Cox just got, 16 years he could get without getting any time off for good behavior, and he's never harmed a soul. All he did was expose corrupt government. So it shows you who they're really afraid of. They're not afraid of protecting the people. They're afraid of really just protecting themselves.
Well, what I've noticed in this resentencing of Schaefer Cox, it's dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. What Schaefer was resentenced here, he didn't do anything wrong. The government themselves were the ones in the wrong here again. He was only trying to uphold the Constitution, the Second Amendment of Americans all over this country, not just in Alaska, not just in Montana or Oregon or Washington. Schaefer was trying to preserve those rights. He had no ill intentions to hurt or harm anyone, and he never did harm her. It was all a thought crime. It was said in the first trial, it was said in his appeals, it was said here again today and yesterday that this was all just some plan that might happen in the future if something like a disaster or martial law happened. Schaefer Cox is literally set in prison for his First Amendment rights and his rights as any American to prepare in case a disaster does happen or some martial law.
Yeah.
What would anybody do if the grocery stores tomorrow was out of milk? You're going to prepare for it if you know it's going to happen, if you know an earthquake's going to happen or some natural disaster.
Yeah.
That's all Schaefer was about, is prepping, preparing for something that could happen.
Yeah.
No dangerous plans at all.
The judge did point out that Schaefer does have a Second Amendment right, but it doesn't involve owning illegal weapons. I had to almost laugh out loud over that. If it's something the government can give you, it's not a right. He forgets why the founders gave us the Second Amendment, why they wanted the militias to be independent from the government. So if the government never went rogue, read the Declaration of Independence. I didn't write it. I'm just saying go and read it. This judge has obviously never read it if he believes that the government can take away the Second Amendment. He said you have a Second Amendment right, but it doesn't involve owning any illegal weapons.
No rights were preserved today.
No.
This judge thankfully gave Schaefer years less than what he could be sitting in there for 26, 27 years. And he's only going to get 16 years. The irony of that, people, for constitutional rights, freedom of speech is totally wrong. It is a kangaroo court.
Yep.
And that's all this judge did, is uphold these unconstitutional regulations and laws again.
Yep, so be careful of people like Bill Fulton, who will set you up if people are pushing you to do something that's breaking the law and you get a bad feeling about it. Go with your gut feeling, because his whole mission was to get Schaefer to say something so that he could arrest him. Bill was proudly in the courtroom today. I got to sit one person over from him. He's as slimy in person as he is online. He actually claimed yesterday it wasn't him who was here. So even Bill Fulton doesn't want to be Bill Fulton. That is how low of a life it is to get paid money to rat out people and entrap them in false crimes. So keep that in mind. You don't want to be Bill Fulton.
Guys, we're going to hit the road. We've got a long ways to go to our next court corruption observations, but we will be live again in the next few days at some other court places and keep exposing corrupt courts and kangaroo system.
Yeah, pray for Schaefer Cox. He'll likely be moved to Sheridan, Oregon if the BOP approves it. Prosecution and defense were in agreement. He could go to Sheridan, Oregon, medium security prison, much better. A lot of the Bundy's group had been through there. So pray that happens. It'll make his 5 to 7 years go a lot better. Pray for Jeff Winehouse. Jason Patrick has some court stuff coming up, so keep him in your thoughts and prayers.
One word I would just like to say as a lawyer, a few words of praise should go out to Mr. Filopovich, who was the attorney who, actually federal public defender, who actually did just a tremendous job. I've seen a lot of lawyers, and his job was as good or better than almost any I've ever seen. And also Mr. Cunningham, the psychology professor who was brought by Schaefer Cox, top notch. And I couldn't say anything more. I mean, I couldn't understate how good the representation was. They did a great job. Unfortunately, Schaefer still remains imprisoned.
Keep this in mind too, guys, that we were predicting a better outcome because the prosecution lost it in there, wasn't fighting, and the defense was fighting tooth and nail. So if he still came in at 188 months, That's with the government not even doing any work. So that should show you guys how bad the courts are when the defense has to work their tails off, literally kangaroo tails, this is kangaroo court. The prosecution just basically has to show up and they're going to pretty much win the day. That's a kangaroo court. That's it. Free Schaefer Cox.
Free Schaefer Cox.